The Prime Minister's message to international students and visitors in Australia: it's time to go home.
To ensure that you can receive the supports that are available where they are in your home countries.
1 million cases of COVID-19 recorded worldwide, but Australia's Chief Medical Officer says it's worse than that.
We believe that the true number is probably 5 or 10 times as much as that.
The United States records the highest daily death toll of any country during the COVID-19 pandemic. And how do you know if you've had coronavirus if you don't have symptoms? The new home test that could potentially tell you in a matter of minutes.
This is SBS World News with Anton. Enus.
Good evening. There are growing calls for government assistance to extend to international students who are struggling to pay bills and school fees now that many have lost their jobs. But the Prime Minister has dashed their hopes, telling them to go home. That's just one of the stories we'll be following in detail over the next hour. In other developments today, global cases of COVID-19 have passed 1 million. But Australia's Chief Medical Officer says cases could be up to 10 times that figure. The government is developing an industry code of conduct for commercial leases. There's also new measures for religious services over Easter and for those on working holiday visas. And more than 130 Australians are set to return home after 2 cruise ships were finally permitted to dock in the United States. Globally, there have been 50,000 deaths and over 210,000 people have recovered. In Australia, 4 people have died over the past 24 hours, taking the national toll to 28. That includes a German passenger off the Artania cruise ship. But we begin our coverage tonight on the Prime Minister's calls for international students and visitors to return home.
A peaceful protest is spreading across our suburbs, backpacks being hung outside homes of international students across the country in a bid to be seen and heard.
Que ya hay muchos estudiantes que nos han escrito que no tienen que comer, que no tienen cómo pagar la vivienda.
COVID-19 has forced many out of a job, and so far government measures haven't extended to international students.
El gobierno australiano que recuerde que los estudiantes internacionales también existimos en Australia.
They're now relying on the generosity of Australians such as Nick Hanna, a lawyer by day. By night, he's helping dozens of students with free legal advice, providing information sheets translated into Spanish.
Australia's a wealthy country. I think we've got the capacity to help them, and I feel we have a moral obligation to make sure that their basic needs are met.
There are around 580,000 international students in Australia, contributing around $30 billion to the economy every year through fees and taxes. Campaigners say community help can only go so far, calling on the government to step in. But the Prime Minister was blunt in his response.
They're obviously not held here compulsorily. If they're not in a position to be able to support themselves, then there is the alternative for them to return to their home countries.
And he had this message for those on visitor visas.
As much as it's lovely to have visitors to Australia in good times, at times like this, if you're a visitor in this country, it is time, as it has been now for some while, and I know many visitors have, to make your way home.
But that's not that easy. Cristian Estrada is among 250 Colombians in Australia who desperately want to go back home, but the border has been closed even to citizens.
Uno quiere estar como al lado de las personas que uno más quiere y que uno más necesita y más lo necesitan.
That was a really disappointing statement by the government, and I think it's pretty out of touch, to be honest.
To recognise that everyone, regardless of their circumstance, needs an appropriate level of support because it's in all of our interests.
All this group wants is some compassion.
We hope that in every country everybody is considered as a human and not as someone that is from another country.
Despite the tough words today, SBS News understands some arrangements will be made for students in coming days. Catalina Flores, SBS World News.
And our chief political correspondent, Brett Mason, joins us now live from Canberra. Brett, some strong words from the Chief Medical Officer today.
Well, Anton, after Scott Morrison said Australia's focus was the safety of its citizens and its residents, not its visitors, the Prime Minister also made some comments about wet markets. We know that the COVID-19 virus is believed to have originated in one of those in Wuhan, China, and the Prime Minister described those markets as a very real and significant problem, even calling on the World Health Organization and the United Nations to do more to police them. But it was the Chief Medical Officer who said he does not believe that just 1 million people have been infected with COVID-19 because of the unwillingness or inability of all countries to test their citizens.
We believe that the true number is probably 5 or 10 times as much as that. The only numbers I have total faith in are the Australian numbers, frankly. I'm only confident about our numbers. I'm certainly not confident that the numbers even out of the US are probably much higher than are being reported, because nobody else in the world has been doing testing like we have.
And following some criticism from communities about the lack of information and resources in other languages, the government confirmed this afternoon that it has ramped that up to ensure that all Australians have access to vital information. And the government says it will also release the scientific modelling it's been relying on to make those decisions. But Anton, that won't happen before Tuesday next week, when National Cabinet is next due to meet.
Thanks, Brett. That is Brett Mason updating us on the latest COVID briefing. The Prime Minister says Australia has entered a new phase of suppression in its fight to contain the coronavirus as the number of new cases continues to slow. The national death toll now stands at 28, which includes a German cruise ship passenger who died in Western Australia. It comes as border officials made some progress moving on several vessels which have been refusing to leave Australian waters.
A bon voyage to the Pacific Explorer. 2 ships departed Sydney Harbour overnight, and authorities are confident several others will soon follow their lead.
Sunday we are planning for Royal Caribbean, their 5 ships to be refuelled, restocked with healthy crew heading back to their port of origin.
But the Ruby Princess, at the centre of the country's largest coronavirus outbreak, is set to remain after another crew member was taken off for medical treatment. The New South Wales Premier says the situation could have been handled better after hundreds of infected passengers left the ship on her watch.
In hindsight, everybody could have done better in relation to that matter, but I've asked the Police Commissioner to investigate the matter. I believe everybody deserves to have answers in relation to that.
Opposition leader Anthony Albanese says the federal government should accept the blame.
Lives have been lost as a result of this debacle. The federal government has control of our borders. They're responsible.
The matters in relation to that vessel have been, I think, addressed by the New South Wales Premier, and we've just focused on meeting the next challenge and learning from the past ones.
The Australian Border Force says it's working to remove at least a dozen more cruise ships lingering around the country.
We have issued notices to all of these ships to leave Australian waters. What they've done is a number of them have sought permission to stay.
One of those, the Artania in Western Australia, where a German passenger has died from the virus in a Perth hospital. Despite 3 new deaths in Australia today, the government says its modelling on infection rates shows the virus is being suppressed.
Whilst there will certainly be some undetected cases, we have a pretty good idea of the size of our outbreak. But we cannot stop, because those community transmissions have been growing.
In Queensland, police have begun denying entry to travellers at the border unless they have a permit or are residents of the state.
We have intercepted some 4,040 vehicles, and approximately 75 people have been turned away.
While Victorians are being told to stay home this weekend, with tougher social distancing restrictions banning almost all outdoor activities, including golfing, fishing and camping.
No trip to the golf course is worth someone's life.
Police are also continuing to ensure those forced into quarantine are abiding by the rules. A 37-year-old man was charged at this Sydney hotel yesterday for allegedly attempting to deliver drugs inside a fruit box to a quarantined traveller. Just another reminder by authorities that only essential services and activities are permitted. Cassandra Bain, SBS World News.
There's growing evidence of the huge impact of the virus on the US economy. A record 6.6 million Americans applied for unemployment benefits in the past week, and almost 10 million in 2 weeks. Nearly 250,000 Americans have now been diagnosed with the disease. 1,100 died in 24 hours. That's the biggest daily death toll in any country since the outbreak began.
This employment office in Georgia is doing great business, helping just some of America's 10 million new job seekers. Behind each of these signs, a tale of uncertainty and concern, with forecasts the deliberate shutdown of the economy could contribute to the deepest recession on record.
We still have to pay rent, we still have to pay bills.
It has been a struggle too as well, because you have millions of people looking for the minimum amount of jobs that are out there.
The demand for jobless benefits overwhelming.
I spent hours trying to call the unemployment offices, and so far, after 300 plus calls and hours on the line, I haven't been able to reach a single person.
At least the Trump administration says one-off stimulus checks of up to $1,200 will come sooner than promised.
Within 2 weeks, the first payments will be direct deposit into taxpayers' account.
It's estimated more than 90% of Americans are under at least partial lockdown, and jobless numbers could soar further if the 10 remaining states follow suit. Georgia's governor waited till yesterday to issue a stay-at-home order, unaware of something doctors have warned of for weeks.
Finding out that this virus is now transmitting before people see signs, we didn't know that.
In Los Angeles and New York, the US epicenter with more than 1,500 deaths, the advice now is for everyone to wear masks outdoors.
It could be a scarf. It could be something you create yourself at home. We don't want you to use the kinds of masks that our first responders need, that our healthcare workers need.
Some of those healthcare workers again took to the streets pleading for more protective equipment.
Every day when I go to work, I feel like a sheep going to slaughter. My colleagues and I are writing our last will and testament.
The shortage of ventilators critical, states competing with each other to source them.
At the current burn rate, we have about 6 days of ventilators in our stockpile.
And states say some ventilators released from the depleted federal government stockpile are faulty.
We thought they were operational, and then we started testing them, and unfortunately all 170 that we received are not.
As the US death toll mounts, the government is releasing some 100,000 body bags. Rena Sarumpayat, SBS World News.
Coming up next. Australians on board 2 cruise ships off the United States coast finally given a path home. The British Prime Minister joins in a round of applause for carers, but has he recovered from COVID-19 infection? And as more countries implement heavy measures to contain the virus, are citizens giving away their civil liberties too freely? The federal government is preparing to evacuate more than 130 Australians who were stranded on 2 cruise ships off the US. The MS Zaandam and MS Rotterdam were denied access to several ports in South America after a deadly coronavirus outbreak. The cruise liners have now docked at Fort Lauderdale in Florida.
An end to a nightmare voyage for over 1,000 passengers. The MS Zaandam reaches safe harbour in Fort Lauderdale, followed by sister ship the MS Rotterdam after a 3-week coronavirus ordeal. Welcome! 4 elderly passengers died at sea, 2 of those deaths attributed to COVID-19. 14 confirmed cases in a critical condition have been transferred from the Zaandam to local hospitals. Dozens of people with coronavirus symptoms will be quarantined on board until they recover and are declared fit for travel. Healthy passengers on both vessels, including 133 Australians, will be allowed to disembark later on Friday after medical screening. The Australian government has arranged an evacuation flight for its nationals, who will be flown from Florida to the US West Coast and could then be back home within 48 hours.
Those passengers should be able to be back in Australia and, of course, to spend 14 days here in quarantine, but in a very short period of time, within 24 to 48 hours, I would hope.
The Zaandam was denied entry to South American ports amid fears sick passengers could overwhelm local healthcare systems after at least 100 passengers and dozens of crew members displayed flu-like symptoms. Florida's governor initially rejected the two ships, but changed his mind after President Donald Trump intervened.
But we have to, from a humane standpoint. We don't have a choice. It's like, I don't want to do that, but we have to. People are dying.
Australia's Foreign Minister is urging other Australians who are still overseas to return home.
To make sure that they minimise the risk of contracting coronavirus in some of those places, that they minimise the risk of having to rely on health systems which are not comparable to Australia's, and that they are much safer here, frankly.
Also warning the government cannot foot the rescue bill for every citizen trapped abroad. Naveen Razik, SBS World News.
The US Navy has fired an aircraft carrier captain who alerted people about a coronavirus outbreak on his ship. Captain Brett Crozier sent a memo to Navy leadership recommending the removal of all but 10% of the carrier's 5,000 crew members. The memo leaked to US media, leading to Crozier's removal. Acting Navy Secretary Thomas Modley said Crozier demonstrated extremely poor judgment in the middle of a crisis. Navy officials say up to 3,000 crew will be taken off the ship, currently docked in Guam and quarantined. In Europe, the virus continues to spread rapidly, with Spain reaching another grim milestone. In its deadliest day since the outbreak began, at least 950 people died in just 24 hours. In the UK, another 569 patients have died as the government pledges to improve testing after criticism from health experts and hospital staff. SBS Europe correspondent Ben Lewis joins us now live from London. Ben, as you've been reporting, the Prime Minister Boris Johnson has spent a week in self-isolation after testing positive to coronavirus. Do we know as yet when he'll be returning to duties as normal?
Anton, we're not 100% sure. He was supposed to be leaving self-isolation this morning after 7 days in that flat above Downing Street. But yesterday afternoon, his spokesman said that the Prime Minister was still experiencing mild symptoms, so he might be in there for a few more days yet. Boris Johnson has been leading the British government's response to the coronavirus crisis via video link. It's a response that has been heavily criticised. Standing alone in a Downing Street doorway, Boris Johnson joined the nation in clapping for carers. But when it comes to coronavirus testing in Britain, few are applauding his government. Authorities admit they're frustrated by the slow rollout, so are healthcare workers, desperate to know if they're contagious.
It's very frustrating. We should be the first so that we can look after our patient. I'm very sad. I feel like crying now. Very sad. What country are we in?
Just 2,800 of England's 500,000 frontline hospital staff have been tested. The government's promising action.
I am now setting the goal of 100,000 tests per day by the end of this month. That is the goal, and I am determined that we will get there.
But a goal isn't a guarantee. Carol Sikora is a British oncologist and former World Health Organisation director. Carol, is the government's announcement on testing simply too late?
I think if we had it 2 weeks earlier, we could have got people back to work, especially in the healthcare sector. We're coming to a climax at Easter here. It's clear it's building up to that.
The UK's death toll will soon pass 3,000. The figures in Spain are even more difficult to comprehend. More than 10,000 dead. This Barcelona morgue has been forced to stack coffins in its car park. Hospitals are struggling. There are 200 patients requiring ventilation in this intensive care unit.
Emotionally, it's also hard because you're worried for yourself, for your own safety, you're worried for your patients, you're worried for your families. Lots of people have relatives or friends who are at home who are unwell, so, you know, it's quite stressful.
Good news is rare. So when this 93-year-old was discharged, having recovered from the disease, hospital staff gave him a rousing send-off. He's one of the lucky ones. Across Europe, 95% of those who've died have been aged 60 or older.
On a positive note, there are reports of people over the age of 100 who were admitted to hospital for COVID-19 and have now since made a complete recovery. It is becoming clearer that the healthier you were before the pandemic plays a crucial role.
France is now including COVID-19 deaths in nursing homes in its toll, which has surged to nearly 5,400. Italy announced another 760 deaths, but the infection rate continues to slowly drop, and fewer Italians are being hospitalised with grave symptoms. Amid the devastation, a moment of joy. Soldiers at this field hospital brought a birthday cake to 62-year-old patient Bruno. He told them the gesture had touched his heart. There has been growing anger in Italy about the European community's response, or lack thereof, to the crisis, and it has prompted the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, to write an extraordinary open letter that's been published in an Italian newspaper. It reads, "It must be recognised that in the early days of this crisis, in the face of the need for a common European response, too many have thought only of their own home problems." And Anton, in Italy, we have seen scenes of Russian troops coming to help out and donations of medical equipment from China. There are concerns in Brussels that many in Italy will not forget that the EU was slow to act.
Bringing us right up to date, that's Ben Lewis in London. And staying abroad, residents in Wuhan, the source of the COVID-19 outbreak, have been told to strengthen self-protection measures and avoid going out unless it's necessary. The hardest hit city in China has begun moving towards normal life after 2 months in lockdown. But a government official has warned that there were risks the city could again be hit by the virus. The Communist Party chief saying it is important to maintain prevention and control measures. And Shenzhen has become the first city in China to put an explicit ban on the sale and consumption of cat and dog meat. Chinese authorities banned the trade of wild animals in February after the source of the coronavirus pandemic was traced to wildlife meat. City governments have since been left to enforce the rules. The new law in Shenzhen comes into force on May the 1st. The National Cabinet is in the process of developing a mandatory code of conduct for commercial tenancy after already placing a temporary ban on tenant evictions. But the Prime Minister is resisting calls to do more to protect residential tenants.
As Australians are told to stay at home, some are finding that easier said than done.
It's pretty hard to stay at home when you don't have a secure home.
Toby Hemmings is among an estimated 1 million workers now unemployed. 2 of his roommates also lost their jobs and were forced to leave their shared rental home. He's hoping to hold on for now, but has failed to negotiate rent with his landlord.
You guys could just line up for the dole, and they've been pretty inflexible about the paying of rent.
Tenants are calling for a freeze on rents, but having already announced a moratorium on evictions, the Prime Minister says that's not on the table.
That doesn't mean there's a moratorium on rents. It means that people are responsible for their rents, but there is a moratorium on evictions. We won't have anyone thrown out of their homes. That's very important.
More and more people are being told to stay at home, and the more people who stay at home, the fewer people that will die in Australia. But you can't stay at home if you don't have one. You can't stay at home if you've been evicted.
This afternoon, New South Wales confirming it'll seek to waive land tax for landlords who pass rent relief on to their tenants in both commercial and retail arrangements. More is expected on commercial tenancies, with National Cabinet in the process of developing a mandatory code of conduct.
To ensure that both of you, the landlord and the tenant, can get through this next period, and on the other side be able to go back to business as usual.
This as National Cabinet agrees on new requirements for visitors on working holiday visas. They'll have to self-isolate for 2 weeks before moving to rural and regional areas.
So this is being done to ensure that those producers can get the work done, but also to ensure that the communities are protected. You can't have 6 backpackers in a caravan out in rural parts of the country. That's not on. Not going to happen.
Scott Morrison has reiterated the social disruption from the effort to slow the spread will go on for at least 6 months. Anzac Day services and marches have already been cancelled, and the most important day for some religions will also look very different. National Cabinet has decided to expand the numbers for those formally conducting religious services, but social distancing measures still apply. Worshippers will still have to take part through online streaming.
But patience must become our virtue in Australia. That will save lives, it will save livelihoods.
Patience which will be tested in the coming months. Pablo Vinales, SBS World News.
The coronavirus pandemic has forced councils around the country to cancel their citizenship ceremonies until further notice. It's left many people unable to make their formal Pledge of Allegiance or to receive their citizenship certificate. And concern is growing with the Department of Home Affairs yet to confirm how it intends to formally confer new citizenship.
It's a joyous occasion that thousands of new Australian citizens from all over the world share with their family and friends every year. But although some soon-to-be citizens understand why they've been put on hold, they say a lack of communication during the coronavirus pandemic is frustrating.
I haven't even been told the ceremonies have been cancelled. There's been no communication whatsoever. I found out through social media that the ceremonies have been cancelled.
The next crop of new citizens could become the first in Australia's history to make their Pledge of Allegiance via video conferencing.
There are many ways in which the government could find an alternative way for allowing people to take the oath that they need to take. I know for universities, for example, all graduation ceremonies have been cancelled, and people are now receiving their testimonies in the mail.
Whether they bypass the ceremony or they do it over Skype, I'm not too bothered. Just get it done.
Just how long council chambers like these around the country remain closed to new citizens remains to be seen, while the chances of success for online campaigns lobbying the federal government to find a solution appear slim.
I think the problem that ordinary people have is trying to force the government to do anything at this time is going to be almost impossible.
Those who haven't had their ceremony still have most of the rights enjoyed by Australian citizens, but they can't vote or apply for an Australian passport. Permanent residents are also able to receive unemployment benefits, while a deal has been struck for New Zealanders who are working for businesses struggling to survive the downturn.
That was a huge hurrah from the Kiwi society within Australia, and very grateful for that.
Until social distancing rules are relaxed, scenes like these will remain out of bounds for new citizens. However painful the wait to jump the final hurdle to becoming Australian citizens is, there's every incentive to have a celebration when the rules allow.
Definitely I will be. It's too cold to go home.
John Baldock, SBS World News.
The World Health Organization is deciding whether to update its guidance about face masks to prevent the spread of the virus. New research has suggested that coughs and sneezes may be projected much further than previously thought.
The shocking power of a sneeze. But do we know for certain how far it might project coronavirus? That's the question now being assessed, and it could change how we respond to the pandemic.
According to the World Health Organization, the infection can be spread to anyone up to a metre away. The advice of the British government and many others is that 2 metres can be considered a safe distance. But research in the United States shows that coughing can project small droplets up to 6 metres, and that sneezing can go even further, up to 8 metres. Now, there's no definitive proof that coronavirus can be spread that far, but there are scientists who believe that that possibility must be considered.
Special cameras in the United States captured a sneeze. Some droplets stay close, but tiny ones go further than previously thought. And the scientists involved say wearing masks could reduce the risk of infection.
It is important to account, however, for the fact that these masks are not sealed, not the high-grade masks, are not protective from the inhalation of those invisible small particulates. So it's important to not be overconfident when wearing them as a way to protecting oneself against the inhalation of those droplets. It's more about protecting others from our own exhalations.
Everyone who has to leave their house has to wear a face mask.
A promotional video in the Czech Republic. And more countries, including the US, are considering similar rules. In Austria, supermarkets are insisting that they're worn. But for the experts assessing whether masks really help, there are concerns about how they might be used.
It might be that wearing a mask is equally as effective or more effective than distancing, provided that mask is worn properly and provided that people don't infect themselves when they're taking the mask off and touch an outer surface which may be contaminated.
For health workers, getting this right is critical. The message from the new research is that the virus can reach further than you might think, making it harder to stay safe.
As countries around the world battle to contain the spread of COVID-19, some governments are going to extreme measures. Peru and Panama are not just enforcing social distancing, but also gender distancing, only allowing men and women to go out on alternate days, while other countries have introduced more stringent surveillance of their citizens.
Police are out in force on the streets of Panama City, checking identification and enforcing tough lockdown measures. Now the government is taking it even further.
Si eres mujer, circularás solo los días lunes, miércoles y viernes. Y si eres varón, circularás los días martes, jueves y sábado. Los domingos, todos en casa.
Some people say they understand why this step is necessary.
Es por la seguridad de todos, ¿no? No creo que el gobierno quiera hacer algo para perjudicar, sino para que nosotros nos cuidemos y cuidemos a otros.
Peru is calling up army recruits to help enforce its lockdown and is also imposing gender distancing.
De prensa del señor presidente de la República, Martín.
The country's president announcing the move said having fewer people on the streets would help security forces police quarantine measures. Other nations are also stepping up monitoring of their citizens. In Italy, police are using drones to ensure lockdown rules are being followed. Russia has rolled out new digital surveillance tools, residents required to download an app on their phones which tracks their movements. South Korea is already using a similar tracking device. Arrivals into the country need to download an app and will be monitored during their 14-day quarantine period. If they leave their location, it sets off an alarm and alerts local authorities.
The apps, the technology will work. We know we can already do a lot of tracking already. I mean, that's been proven.
Few countries appear to have gone as far as some of the heavy-handed tactics seen in China to get infection rates down. As for an erosion of privacy and personal liberties, that may prove to be unavoidable for now.
I think people are willing to accept that for the greater good, but it's going to be interesting to see that, how that's maintained over the longer term.
Just another aspect of the new normal for many of us. Gloria Kleisch, SBS World News.
Virtual meeting platform Zoom has vowed to fix its safety features after encountering numerous privacy breaches, with the FBI warning that hackers are having a field day. The application has been criticised for sending user data to Facebook, falsely claiming it used end-to-end encryption and allowing hosts to track attendees. Usage of the video conferencing application has increased 20-fold since the COVID-19 pandemic began. But companies including NASA have banned employees from using it. Zoom has frozen all development for 90 days. The financial regulator has warned real estate agents who are advising tenants to access their superannuation to pay their rent may be breaking the law. SBS Finance Editor Ricardo Gonçalves joins us in the studio now. And Ricardo, there's been some movement on rental relief today.
Anton, but not for now. The government is focusing on small businesses hit hard by social distancing laws. It's becoming a common story. Business owners forced into desperate measures as they fight to stay afloat.
We've probably dropped 80%, 80 to 90% of our trade, and that happened overnight.
Rent remains a key concern for business owners across the country. Today, the government stopped short of unveiling a relief package, but says it's working on a code of practice for commercial leases, which could see rental waivers for small businesses that have seen a 30% reduction in turnover.
A rental waiver for a period of 6 months or whatever is negotiated. It's going to help us keep our doors open.
Support may be further off for those in the residential market.
Priority has been on the commercial tenancies given the business issues involved and the many business closures.
Temporary bans on evictions are making some landlords nervous.
Typically landlords are mum and dad investors, and most mum and dad investors only own one investment property, so that rental income is a significant proportion of their mortgage repayment.
Causing some investors and agents to request tenants draw down on their super.
We are hearing this story of tenants being required to hand over enormous amounts of information about their circumstances, including superannuation and whether or not they've attempted to draw that down before agents will even consider a rent reduction.
An experience felt firsthand by this musician who doesn't want to be identified.
Because there's no more gigs and not really any more recording, my income's fallen by about 40%.
He received an email earlier this week from his real estate agent saying tenants must have exhausted all options before they are able to give any advice to the landlord.
So the things they listed were trying to get Centrelink benefits, deferring or asking for a pause on any loans that you have, or dipping into your super early, which I think made me angry because I think that's disastrous for your retirement.
The corporate regulator has warned agents breaching financial advice laws could face up to 5 years jail, saying financial advice must only be provided by qualified and licensed financial advisors or financial counsellors. As part of the government's multi-billion-dollar stimulus package, laid-off workers can access up to $20,000 of superannuation savings over the next 2 years. The US is facing its sharpest rise in unemployment in history after an unprecedented surge in initial jobless claims last week. As we mentioned earlier, 6.6 million workers filed for unemployment benefits last week. The US unemployment rate currently stands at a record low of 3.5%. They'll update those figures later tonight, but it won't include that huge spike.
This obviously is going to drive up the unemployment rate enormously. It could go up as much to 10%. We won't see that tomorrow yet in tomorrow's jobs report because their cut-off date is actually mid-March.
We may be a couple of weeks behind the states as far as those devastating numbers, but it's not unusual in all of our social networks and family and friends that people have lost jobs.
Today, economists at St George predicted Australia's jobless rate will hit 9% by the June quarter. Consumer stockpiling has seen retail sales rise a better than expected 0.5% in February. The Bureau of Statistics says there were increases for food retailing, department stores and household goods. Clothing, footwear and personal accessory sales fell.
So I'm expecting that grocery spending will continue to be pretty strong over the next few months. But for every dollar that you spend on an essential item, you spend $15 on recreation or eating out type of things. So even though we'll have this big boost to grocery spending, it won't be enough to offset the weakness in clothing or in eating out spending.
AMP Capital expects consumers may save parts of their share of the government stimulus packages like JobKeeper amid economic uncertainty. Still in the sector, the world's second biggest clothing retailer, the Swedish headquartered H&M, has reported a 46% plunge in March retail sales as the coronavirus pandemic took its toll. Globally, it has closed nearly 3,800 of its 5,000 stores. Online sales rose 17% last month. Australia's most widely followed market indicator, the S&P ASX 200, turned 20 this week after launching in the year 2000. Now, no doubt it has had one of its most volatile periods recently as investors adjust to the coronavirus pandemic. We are now down 29.3% from the February high, still in a bear market territory. But this week we saw somewhat of a recovery, with shares up 4.6% over the past 5 trading sessions. While encouraging, experts say volatility will continue.
It's going to simply be a case of if and when the pandemic is under control, the market will have the confidence that we actually start getting back to normal. And until then, we're going to keep seeing big daily, weekly and monthly swings while people just try and guess where we might go next.
To today's market moves now, where the 200 declined 1.7%. The banks led the losses, but resource stocks found some strength. Harvey Norman rose as it cancelled its interim dividend. Car dealer AP Eagers was the worst performer. The Australian dollar there on the screen is buying 60.67 US cents. Now, next week, we've got the RBA board meeting. The ABS will release additional information on the business impacts of COVID-19. And of course, daylight saving time ends this weekend. Anton.
Don't forget that. Thanks, Ricardo. Briefly to other news, and a train that derailed in Victoria, killing its driver and pilot, was travelling in excess of 100 kilometres an hour when it crossed into a section of track with a limit of 15 kilometres per hour, according to a safety report. An investigation into the February 20th crash north of Melbourne may take more than 18 months to determine its exact cause. 39 of 153 passengers on board were injured in the crash. And former rugby league star and teacher Chris Dawson has formally pleaded not guilty to murdering his wife almost 40 years ago. The 71-year-old was arraigned by video link in the New South Wales Supreme Court. He has repeatedly claimed Lynette Dawson is still alive since her disappearance in January of 1982. The case was scheduled to go to trial later this year. And Coles has joined Woolworths in easing buying restrictions on fresh milk and meat products. Shoppers were previously only able to buy 1 packet of mince and 2 units of chilled milk. There will also be new limits on how many customers can be inside supermarkets at any one time in the lead up to Easter. People may be counted on their way in and asked to wait outside. Coming up next, how a new test claims to reveal if you've had COVID-19 and not even noticed. Also, changing gears, how one sport is improvising during the coronavirus pandemic. Right now, there are 2 types of tests for COVID-19. One is the swab test, which tells you if you currently have the virus or not. The other, which is being developed, is an antibody test, which will be able to tell you whether or not you actually had coronavirus. It'll be particularly useful to the many people who may get it without ever knowing.
This is what a home antibody test looks like. This one is for HIV and can be bought online. It's this kind of highly accurate finger prick blood test which is needed for coronavirus. An antibody test would tell you if you've previously been infected with coronavirus and have built up some immunity which might protect you in future. The British company behind the HIV test says it hopes to have a similar one for coronavirus ready within weeks.
I think it would make an incredible difference. The question everyone's asking themselves is, have I had it? You know, I had a cold in January, I didn't feel very well. So for us, antibody detection is the key really to accelerating how we handle this.
The government agrees it's already bought 3.5 million antibody tests, but these are still being evaluated to check they're accurate.
We're currently working with 9 companies who've offered these tests and evaluating their effectiveness. These antibody tests, blood tests, offer the hope that people who think they've had the disease will know they're immune and can get back to life as much as possible as normal. But they've got to work.
This is one of several COVID-19 antibody tests already on the market. Now, this one is designed for health professionals to use rather than in the home. You draw 2 drops of blood, put them in a sample tray, add a chemical, and wait 10 minutes. Well, this is really rather surprising. I've not had any symptoms of coronavirus, yet these 2 lines here suggest that I have previously had COVID-19, and it suggests that I may now have some immunity from the disease if this test is accurate. The company that makes the test is based in Northern Ireland. It says it's highly accurate, but it's not been endorsed by medical regulators.
We've not been approached directly by the government or Public Health England or any of the other public health agencies of the four nations. If we were approached, we would be happy to submit our tests for validation. We think that's a good thing.
An accurate antibody test would help us get back to this: Britain at work. Medical staff and other key workers could be checked to see if they've had coronavirus and may now have some immunity. It can't come soon enough.
Some sports news now. The NBL denies a deal has been agreed with rising American basketball star LaMelo Ball to purchase the Illawarra Hawks. The 18-year-old's agent, Jermaine Jackson, says he and Ball now own the foundation team. The NBL has taken back the licence from previous owner Simon Stratford after the club was placed into voluntary administration. Ball is projected to be a top 5 pick in this year's NBA draft. He averaged 17 points, 7 rebounds and 7 assists during his 12-game stint with the Hawks last season.
We've never seen nothing like this. And not to mention, he has about 5.3 million followers on Instagram. He has his own reality show with his family. And this is what I'm saying. He's forming into a young cultural icon of his generation.
It's understood Ball would lead an ownership group if the deal is approved. With sport across the world on hold due to the coronavirus pandemic, Australia's premier motorsport series has improvised to replace postponed events. Supercars has shifted its action from the racetrack to the virtual world.
It's the sights and sounds a race driver is familiar with. But for David Reynolds, driving a simulator just doesn't feel the same as being behind the wheel of a supercar.
It's weird. It's like tasting fake sugar when you could just have real sugar.
With the supercar season postponed until June, Australia's leading drivers are preparing to battle each other online over the coming months in an E-Series.
There's no repercussions for crashing into each other and there's no damage bill. The boys don't have to fix it. You don't feel so bad. So, man, I'm going to crash into everyone.
The 2017 Bathurst 1000 champion's career in the virtual world hasn't started well.
I did maybe 5 laps and then I crashed the car and I tried to drive it backwards around the wrong way, and I did like 2 corners, then I just got disqualified and I wasn't allowed to join back in.
His teammate, Anton is more familiar with the technology. The 24-year-old says it has helped him break into the supercar series.
I had to learn a lot of new tracks and try and bridge the gap to the front guys and the more experienced guys, so use it a lot to be able to do that.
Di Pasquale has been spending up to 6 hours a day on the simulator during the coronavirus pandemic.
Basically, if you drive it like the real car, you can get a lap time out of it. So you just got to treat it like a real car, and generally it comes out the other end. You just got to adjust to basically having screens instead of windows.
All 25 drivers will compete in the 10-week series. The sport's most successful driver, Jamie Whincup, is predicted to struggle.
Jamie's 7-time champion, probably the best driver we've ever had in the country, and yeah, he can't do it for shit. So
the competition begins next weekend. Adrian Archuli, SBS World News.
Coming up next, the weather and how a pivot has ensured this business won't go out of style in a crisis. Time to look at the weather now, and a band of mid to high level cloud can be seen over eastern states moving east. A cold front continues to move through the Bight and towards southeast, South Australia, Victoria and Tasmania. In the major centres, showers and easing wind in Adelaide, a shower or 2 in Brisbane and Canberra, showers in Hobart and Melbourne, and cloud clearing in Sydney. Looking further afield, sunny in Auckland, rain in Samoa, thunder in Nadi and cloudy in Noumea. In Southeast Asia, thunder in Bangkok, drizzle for Jakarta, sunny in Phnom Penh, rain in Honiara. Further north, sunny in Beijing, rain for Hanoi, drizzle in Hong Kong and overcast conditions in Shanghai. Heading west, sunny in Baghdad, overcast in Beirut, partly cloudy in Jerusalem, thunder in Tehran. On to Europe now, partly cloudy in London, showers for Moscow, fog in Paris and sunny in Rome. In Africa, partly cloudy in Addis Ababa, cloudy in Casablanca, thunder in Johannesburg and partly cloudy in Nairobi. In South America, rain in Bogota, partly cloudy in Buenos Aires, cloudy in Rio and partly cloudy in Santiago. And for North America, partly cloudy in New York, fog for Los Angeles, a few showers in Vancouver and rain for Mexico City. A not-for-profit organisation aimed at creating work opportunities for refugees and migrants through fashion has found a way to keep staff employed and help our healthcare providers, with the business pivoting away from making fashionable clothing to medical scrubs.
In the space of just 1 week, the Social Studio in Melbourne has gone from creating ready-to-wear fashion to medical scrubs for health workers at cost price.
We're looking at about 40 units a week at the moment, so that's a top and a bottom. And yeah, just hoping we can kind of get faster and keep getting our fabric coming in and all those things.
So this is an idea of what it looks like before it's been pressed.
The idea came about after a Victorian health official flagged a shortage of scrubs last week. The next morning, production manager Luca Ray sourced fabric, made a pattern and got sewing.
It's been a really crazy week, but today feels great. We're sending our first shipment out today and we're all feeling pretty satisfied.
It's definitely, it's great to be being able to help out in that way, but it's also been a really great opportunity for the studio to keep all of our workers busy and active during this time.
The not-for-profit studio, which educates and employs young people from refugee and migrant backgrounds, has 12 staff members. Most are now working from home and they're busier than ever.
We want to be able to keep making the scrubs, and we've also looked into supporting PPE equipment, so we're talking to the government about that at the moment and just using all of our resources to help support in any way that we can.
The first 2 weeks' worth of online orders for the scrubs have already sold out. Rachel Carey, SBS World News.
Great idea. Recapping our top stories now, travellers in Australia have staged a silent protest hanging backpacks outside their homes. As they call for financial aid to compensate for lost work, the Prime Minister has urged visitors to go home and seek help in their own countries. And over 1,000 Americans have died in 24 hours from coronavirus. That's the biggest daily death toll in any country since the outbreak began. And that's the world this Friday. If you missed some of tonight's bulletin, you can catch up on the SBS World News website shortly. And a reminder, you can also watch the bulletin live there or on our app. You'll also find the latest stories there. Our next bulletin on SBS is at 10:25 with Darren Mara. From all of us, good night.